the India Energy and Climate Center at the Goldman School of Public Policy at UC Berkeley. It brings together scientists and researchers from the university and Lawrence Berkeley Lab with a mission to empower sustainable economic growth for India and the Global South. Our research informs policymaking in India, United States, and many other countries for a clean energy transformation that can deliver economic, energy security, and environmental benefits. To hear more from us in future, please subscribe to our newsletter on our website, as well as follow us on LinkedIn. We are super excited today to kick off our quarterly panel discussion series with this conversation, the role of energy storage in meeting India's growing electricity demand. I would like to welcome our esteemed panelists, Shri R.P. Gupta, Chairman and Managing Director, Solar Energy Corporation of India, Commissioner Sivagunda, Vice Chair, California Energy Commission. Gujarat Principal Secretary Ms. Verma is unable to join us this morning. Instead, we welcome Shri Jay Prakash Shivahare, Managing Director, Gujarat Urja Vikas Nigam Limited. And we welcome Dr. Rahul Valavalkar, President, India Energy Storage Alliance. The discussion will be moderated by Dr. Nikita Abhyankar, who is a scientist at Lawrence Berkeley Lab and at ICC. So now I invite Dr. Abhyankar to kick us off with a short presentation.
Thank you, Shruti. And welcome, everybody. I hope my slides are visible and I am audible. So I'm going to be talking about some of the broad technology and economic trends and implications for India for the grid-scale energy storage that we see in the US, globally, as well as some of our findings on India. So most of you in this audience would already know about the dramatic cost reductions in the battery packs that we have witnessed over the last 10 or 12 years. Just in the last 10 years, the battery pack prices have fallen by nearly 90% to approximately $139 per kilowatt hour in 2023. And this reduction is expected to continue in the future, where the battery pack prices will most likely drop to $80 a kilowatt hour by 2030 and around $60 to $65 per kilowatt hour by 2035. And just note that these are only the average battery pack prices, average of LFP, NMC, and all other chemistries. LFP prices would actually be much lower, around $100 to $120 per kilowatt hour in 2023, in that ballpark or so. But perhaps because of such a dramatic reduction in the battery pack prices, the battery demand globally has also surged over the last few years, as we have already witnessed with the deployment of electric vehicles, as well as increasing deployment of grid-scale battery storage. So the chart on the right shows the annual battery demand in the world from 2020 through 2030, and we expect demand to increase by nearly tenfold, from close to 200 gigawatt hours per year in 2020, increasing to more than 2,000 gigawatt hours per year by 2030. But interestingly, over 90% of this battery demand will actually be from electric vehicles, implying that power sector will be less than 10% of the overall battery demand and is unlikely to impact the supply chains in general. Now, such deep storage cost declines is also dramatically impacting the resource choices in globally, as well as particularly in the US. So the map here shows the current battery storage installations in the US, standalone as well as co-located. So US currently has nearly 15 gigawatts of battery storage, grid-scale battery storage installed, with nearly half of that battery storage located in California, the state with a lot of bubbles on the left on the map that you see. The typical duration of these batteries is approximately 2 to 4 hours. 50% of these batteries are co-located with solar PV. About 40% are standalone batteries, and the remaining 10% are co-located with other forms of renewables, as well as other energy sources. Speaking about the future, over the next 4 to 5 years in the US interconnection queue, or the power plant pipeline, we see nearly 1,500 gigawatts of clean energy resources in the interconnection queue. That includes 900 gigawatts of solar power. That includes nearly 400 gigawatts of solar plus storage, 275 gigawatts of wind, including offshore wind, and 300 gigawatts of standalone batteries. And of course, not all of this capacity will come online. Only about 30% of this capacity will actually come online. But this clearly shows a trend where the sector is headed in the future overall. But the most important question is, with so many batteries getting deployed or even actually deployed currently, what is the cost of those batteries? So the typical combination configuration that we see in the US, especially of the co-located batteries, is approximately 50% of the solar PV megawatts times 4 hours. So that captures approximately 20 to 30% of the daily solar generation in batteries. And the average storage cost adder, because of this configurations, appears to be modest, around $12 per megawatt hour or 1 rupee per kilowatt hour, give or take. And of course, as you store more energy, as also evident in from the chart, the storage adder would keep on increasing. And this is also evident in some of the actual solar plus storage PPA prices that we see the utilities assigning. So the typical solar plus storage PPA prices in the US hover around $30 to $40 per megawatt hour mark, or 2.5 to 3 rupees per kilowatt hour or so. These are obviously subsidized costs. If you take the unsubsidized costs, which are approximately 25 to 30% higher, solar plus storage costs would be around 3.5 to 4 rupees per kilowatt hour, which is a significant jump from where they were even just 4 or 5 years ago. Now, speaking globally, what this chart shows, the standalone battery storage capital expenditure, a 4-hour standalone battery storage capital expenditure in multiple countries, China in the red, global average in the black, and US and EU. In the US, what we see, the standalone storage capital expenditure approximately is $300 per kilowatt hour for 4-hour batteries. But interestingly, in China, that capital expenditure has already reached approximately $150 per kilowatt hour already, and is expected to continue to drop as we go along further. And this is actual data from the actual projects that are currently deployed on the ground, thanks to BNEF surveys. So the question that we asked is, for solar, for example, India has achieved lower capex cost, capital expenditure costs than China. Can India achieve similar success with storage? So if India achieves the same storage capex as we see in China already, what would be the storage adder in India? So this is what is shown on the chart on the right with the orange bars. The x-axis is the hours of storage as 50% PV capacity, and y-axis is the storage adder on top of the PV tariff. So for a typical 50% PV capacity 4-hour storage that captures approximately 30% of the PV energy generation into the batteries, the storage adder that we estimate in India should be around 1.3 rupees per kilowatt hour if India is able to achieve the same costs that China has already achieved today. But the key question around India is, what role would energy storage play in the power system, especially in meeting the 500 gigawatt clean power target? So we kind of did a pretty comprehensive simulation of the Indian grid going all the way through 2030, and this is the result of that simulation. So what this chart shows is the national hourly dispatch for 4 key months in India in 2030, assuming 500 gigawatts of clean power is integrated into the grid. And then we asked how much storage would be needed and what role would storage play. So just focus on the maroon area, which is showing the storage charging and discharging in the national dispatch in these charts. So the negative is charging, positive is discharging. So what we find is storage will be a critical source of flexibility and diurnal balancing, and that could also be critical for avoiding inefficient thermal investments and also enhancing the transmission asset utilization. What we find is approximately 250 to 300 gigawatt hours of energy storage would be optimal for the Indian grid going through 2030, which is approximately 10 to 15% of the average daily renewable energy generation. And finally, how would the storage be operated? What we find is it should be charged just once during the day, during solar hours, and discharged during the morning and the evening peak, approximately 4 to 6 hours of discharge every day. But although it will be discharging 2 times in a day, it will be charging only once in the day. So this only completes one charge discharge cycle in a day. And this is really important from a storage bit design and also storage procurement perspective. Which brings me to my last slide. We have talked in general about storage, but the key question before Indian policymakers is, should we go for pumped hydro or battery storage? So what this chart shows is the levelized cost of storage, just the energy that goes in and out of batteries. This is not the adder, but this is just the cost of energy throughput from the batteries for co-located batteries, co-located with PVs for varying degrees of hours of storage, from 1 hour all the way through 12 hours. So the black line is what the costs that we currently see in India, approximately $250 to $300 per kilowatt hour of capital expenditure. The orange line is the China cost of approximately $150 per kilowatt hour, as they've already reported. And the green line is the projection for 2030. So now let's quickly compare how the co-located battery costs compare with pumped hydro. Pumped hydro levelized cost of storage is shown in blue. So what we find, for low storage hours, batteries are significantly cheaper than pumped hydro. But for longer storage hours, pumped hydro starts getting cheaper. For approximately 4 to 8 hours, battery storage will be cheaper through 2030 or so. And as we already saw through our grid dispatch results, we are looking at 4 to 6 hours of battery storage or energy storage in general to be cost optimal to integrate the 500 gigawatts of renewable capacity. Obviously, this is to achieve this level of energy storage, one needs pretty comprehensive policy and regulatory strategies. I'm not going to belabor on exactly what kind of strategies would be most optimal. We are going to talk about it with the panel. So with that, let me stop here and let's move on to our panel discussion in this context. So my first question is to Mr. Gupta. SECI has really taken the lead in India in procuring storage, RE plus storage through large-scale tenders, and has also offered significant scale in those auctions. And auction designs also range from standalone storage to firm dispatchable RE and so on and so forth. So can you give us an overview of the ongoing storage auctions by SECI currently in India? And what was the motivation behind the auction or the bid design?
Yeah, good morning, everyone, and good evening to the friends in US. Actually, SECI started its role as the aggregator, as you rightly said. First of all, in the renewable energy, plain solar and plain wind. But later on, we moved on to combination of the solar and wind, the so-called hybrid. And further, we started integrating the battery into it to give it some sort of a shape of round the clock or a firm and dispatchable FDRE kind of tenders, where we did not actually specify the configuration. We simply asked for our outcomes, that is, what is the kind of megawatt requirement in different times of the day and year. Let the person design their own capacity of solar and wind and what combination of battery capacity should be integrated into it. There's the kind of innovation or the kind of competitive factor which was to be determined by the developers themselves. But as the total RE share in electricity grid that kept on increasing, the need for a standalone battery itself was felt. Now, we have just carried out one standalone battery auction, where of course it was about 2 years back and the prices were quite high. But Gujarat has taken part of it, and another part we are giving to our grid operator, that is Grid India. Further, we are in the process of bringing out the standalone tender, aggregating for the states and allocating the capacities to state, as we have done for renewable tenders. Now, there are different capacities of batteries which have already come in the form of RTC tenders, which we had brought out. And recently we commissioned one of our own project in Chhattisgarh that is owned by SECI itself, where the battery of 125 megawatt hour that had been added into configuration of about 100 megawatt hour of solar. Now, going ahead, actually, as you rightly said, batteries have their own distinct advantage of being located anywhere, unlike the pump hydro. But what we believe, that we should remain technologically neutral, whether it is pump hydro or whether it is a battery. Whatever is costing the lowest to the consumers and to the discoms, that should be the configuration we should be allowing it. Batteries, apart from being co-located, the possibility of being co-located also have a advantage that they enable the transmission system to be utilized more gainfully. But again, as you have brought out, at the and sometime in 2030 battery prices, the pump storage will become cheaper only after 8 hours. But currently we believe at the current battery prices, roughly it's about 4 to 5 hours at which the pump storage becomes cheaper. But then pump storage has its own disadvantage that we have to tie it for much longer, that is about 25 to 30 years. Whereas the battery if we tie up today, that will be only for 12 hours, and then the discoms can get the benefit of lower prices of the battery at a later stage. So, but what we believe is that we will be bringing out the tenders. Probably it will be technologically agnostic, and maybe shorter duration tender for about 12 years or so, where the both compete at the same footing, and the price becomes the determining factor. A standalone, of course, would be one of the another option, but our RTC and FDRE tender would continue to be there to take this sector forward. Thank you.
No, I think that is excellent, especially the technology agnostic and cost optimal is literally music to our ears. So taking the same thread ahead, Shivhare-ji, I think the question for you is, Gujarat is often what we call as the California of India, is literally the front runner states in terms of the ambition on renewable energy, clean energy, and RE deployment and so on. And you have also done some procurement of energy storage and so on. So can you talk a little bit about the role energy storage you see playing in Gujarat, both in the short run as well as in the medium to long run?
Thank you, Nikit. In Gujarat, we are already tying up for energy storage. As Gupta sir has told, we have gone ahead with SECI for 150 into 2. So that is 300 megawatt hour. And also we, through our own subsidiary GSET, are installing the plant. So that will be commissioned very soon. Now we have also recently floated a tender for a standalone battery in JETCO substations. And it's going to play a very important role. So we are exploring all the possibilities, including battery storage and pumped storage. We are also in our policy brought element of emerging technologies. So we would like to explore those possibilities also, because all the different technologies play different kind of a role in providing grid stability. So like solar could be very useful when we want to go for a storage near the generation. We are also exploring it on the transmission network and at the load centers also, because Gujarat is also front runner state in solar rooftop. We contribute almost 82% of the national achievement, that is around 2,200 megawatt. And it is likely to increase with new target announced by Honorable Prime Minister for 1 crore households to be covered in a very short period. So we are also exploring possibilities near the load center, because we also have started facing some sort of issues in voltage fluctuations. So we have set up one center for net zero energy transition in our training wing called G3. And that is working on different models. We have also tied up with reputed organizations. They are helping us. So that's why we are exploring all the possibilities. With the help of BISEC, we identified some good locations, and we found that, to our great pleasure and surprise, that there is huge possibility of around 15,000 megawatt in pumped hydro. So we are exploring that possibilities also. Nikit, I'm happy to see the kind of figures you are showing. If we can get those kind of prices in India, trajectory is going to be like this. It will happen very fast.
Excellent, thank you. And again, so putting that thread, how do we get those costs, and how California, for example, got those costs? So I'm going to invite Vice Chair Gunda. And I think the question for Mr. Gunda is really about how did California do it? For example, California has the largest energy storage capacity in the country. In the US, also has some of the largest renewable energy installed capacity, and with increasingly affordable solar plus storage contracts, also on an unsubsidized basis, not necessarily just with subsidy. And we're talking about grid scale here. So can you talk a little bit about how California achieved this, and right in the alley that Mr. Shivhare mentioned, and what kind of regulatory or market reforms were instrumental in making this happen?
Yeah, thank you, Nikit, for that question. And by the way, excellent presentation. And thanks, Shruti, for the invitation to join the esteemed panel today. It's really incredible to hear from Gupta sir and Shivhare sir on the work that they're doing. So just kind of on the other side of the world, just kind of the California journey, just kind of setting the context on, I think, how we're achieving this. It really is driven by the state's climate agenda. So the California's climate agenda requires California to be carbon neutral in 2045. And the current strategy that's agreed upon broadly is to electrify large parts of California's economy, and then undergird that with clean energy. So that's kind of the plan. And that's really what triggers the long journey towards having large amount of storage in California. So at this point, given the California's clean energy journey, we need to add anywhere from 50 to 60,000 megawatts by 2045. That's roughly the scale at which we need to be adding the storage to meet the climate goals of California, which is about 100% retail sales, met by zero carbon resources by 2045. So, if taking back into the California's journey, early plans really kind of pointed towards, in order to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, which are, once you take solar and wind, the need for ramping resources in the late afternoon, and that time between solar and wind, as the solar goes down and the wind comes, really kind of points towards a firm dispatchable resource, such as a storage, right? So that's really what points to storage. And what California has done is really require the authorization of clean energy resources. So the way that the state works is we have, the integrated resource planning that happens by various areas of California. And once those integrated resource plans indicate, what resources to be added, now basically those agencies will require the load serving entities to bring them on. As Nikit mentioned, we are going to meet 10,000 megawatts by end of March, in California. And that went from 500 megawatts in 2020 to that number. So it's like a rapid growth of 9,500 megawatts. And that's also driven by reliability. California had its first outage in 20 years in 2020. And that triggered the race for firm dispatchable resources to match the evening power. So in terms of kind of some of the key areas today, given the size of the batteries, they're actually performing largely in supporting reliability. But prior, at about 500 to 1,000 megawatts, it was primarily ancillary services. So the kind of key areas that we had to work on is to figure out, the structure around optimizing the charging and discharge and what are the market rules around that. So in order to design the market rules, it's really kind of giving the scheduling coordinators the flexibility to best manage them. So currently the market is set up in a way that you are charging when we have negative pricing in solar and wind, and then kind of using that in the evening hours. There's plenty to add there, but I know like we are watching the time, so I'll come back to further additions as we go forward.
Thank you. I think great segue. So I would love to have a pin on that, Vice Chair Gunda, because I do have a few more questions for you, which I'll get to you in the next round, especially around how batteries play in the reliability space, as well as how they play in the capacity and energy markets. So now moving on to Rahul. So obviously we have heard the excitement around energy storage in general and the need for energy storage. So clearly energy storage field seems pretty busy nowadays. So I would just like to get the developer's perspective on how you're looking at this. Are there any specific barriers preventing the developers from taking advantage of the global cost reduction? So can you just elaborate on the developer's perspective?
Sure. Thanks, Nikit. I think it is really exciting to see the conviction now across various regulatory bodies as well as tendering agencies on energy storage. And we are seeing now more and more tenders being announced. And that is a positive news. And we are seeing now more than almost 20 IPPs and developers are starting to focus and develop teams around energy storage. There are twofold challenges right now. Since in last 5 years, we haven't had too many projects being actually built. So many of the companies who had started looking at India as a system integrator, they haven't actually expanded their capacities in India. So right now, the main challenge what developers are facing is that they are actually reliant right now on completely imported systems for some of these tenders, and there is sort of a bigger uncertainty around the availability, around the price fluctuations, what is happening, because suddenly, like within a span of 6 months, suddenly, depending on your procurement cycle, you could be seeing like a higher prices, or you could be actually getting windfall gains, like what is happening right now with the recent last couple of months price reduction. But right now in India, most of the developers do not have that experience of managing these projects. As Mr. Shivagundaji mentioned, in California, basically the scale up from 500 megawatt to 10 gigawatt our deployment is happening over a period of 10 years. Whereas in India, suddenly we are now seeing individual tenders which are at gigawatt hour scale, and the developers have to actually get ready for managing that. So we do think it's going to be a little bit challenging. But again, once we start seeing some of these tenders actually going through and projects getting commissioned, I think many of the international players are definitely following India. And once we start actually delivering on these projects, I'm pretty sure the capacity gap and knowledge gap will get filled quickly. But right now, the test is next 12 to 18 months are going to be very, very crucial because we have had this sort of a on and off with various tenders and retendering or cancellation of tenders too many times in last 3-4 years. And that is affecting some of the sentiments for developers.
Excellent, thank you. Towing the same line, the next question is it's for Guptaji. Shivaraji also mentioned about the importance of cost reduction. Rahul also talked about it. And so what we see is some differential in the costs of storage bids that we see in India versus what we see as global benchmarks or what we see in the US. So SECI obviously is one company that has really enabled the solar cost reduction in India through really innovative auctions and bid design. So what strategies, in your opinion, could emulate the solar success that SECI has achieved in the storage field? Is it bid design? Is it regulatory framework? Is it something else? Would love to hear your thoughts.
I believe that it's a combination of all these. the bid design and particularly the payment security which SECI has provided, coupled with a very fair regulatory system which is there in India, the prices of renewable really came down. To the extent that probably some of the developers, they quoted very low prices and later on they reneged it. Now, as Rahul said, there has been some of the reneging on part of the DISCOMs as well, but Rahul, we are bringing them on track. So there, I don't think there should be any apprehension that just because the prices are dropping, the DISCOMs or SECI will renege on the contracts which are already signed for the higher prices. It happened in solar, it happened in wind, when we paid sort of 15 or 16 rupees per unit at the very beginning for solar and almost the same kind of price for wind. But that constituted a very small percentage of the overall energy share. So what is important is that once they are, they know that there will be no going back on the contracts already signed, and we are fair to the developer. Particularly, we take to the extent possible, we try to minimize their risks on other than business factors. The business factor risks they have to take, but all other risks we have been able to minimize and take it on SECI. So that has enabled it. So I think these factors, the bid design, a very transparent bidding system, a fair regulatory mechanism which is in place, and the assuredness that we will be honoring the bid and there will be no payment problem, that will drive it. The next thing is that why the solar and wind prices really came down, that was the aggregation which we did. Some experience the solar and wind player had already gained through the feed-in price mechanism. So as far as the technology and the establishing the plant was concerned, they had gained enough experience. And I believe in storage system also, because of our FDRE and RTC tenders, they have got enough experience for putting up these systems as far as the technology part is concerned. Now, the aggregation and the transparent bid, we believe that will bring down the prices here in India as far as the storage system is concerned. Now, let me give one more feedback on this. Government is also going to announce for a bid for manufacturing of batteries within India, a PLI scheme for particularly the stationary storage. That bid for about 10 gigawatt would be out very soon. So we are not only trying to bring up the battery system as such, but also we are trying to see that it is manufactured in India and the costs are reduced through that. Thank you.
Right. No, I think that that again makes a lot of sense, particularly especially the aggregation point, and that kind of drove the solar and wind prices down. That's absolutely critical. So the next question is for Shivhari-ji. While SECI or NTPC and other central companies and agencies are doing some bids and auctions at the central level, and they have the benefit of volume aggregation that they can do for multiple utilities and so on. But I think Gujarat has also done its own solar, wind, and also recently storage auctions and bids. So I'm just curious, what are the specific challenges that you have from a state utility or a state government standpoint that you have faced while procuring energy storage as well as renewable energy in general? And are you planning any kind of RE plus storage hybrids, or what kind of storage that you are planning over the next 5 or 10 years? Just why standalone? Why co-located? Why no storage? So just would love to hear your motivations in general.
Thank you, Niket. I think 3-4 questions. Let me take one by one. First of all, let me give the perspective what kind of ambitions Gujarat is having. Out of 500 gigawatt envisaged being up to 2030, Gujarat would contribute almost more than 100 gigawatt. Out of that, around 60 gigawatt will be tied up by GUNL only. And this year, we have tied up 9,500 megawatt till now, and we'll cross 12,000, like 12 gigawatt by the end of financial year. This does not include PM Kusum, which will be around 1 gigawatt, and through solar rooftop also around 600 megawatt. And to absorb this kind of RE, we'll need huge storage capacity. That's why we have floated tenders. I think now on regulatory side, there are no challenges. The only issue is some practical issues that we face in our when we are floating. So we are trying to resolve those issues, like when we go for bucket filling approach, bidders have a lot of issues. What could be the location of the substation? Are we going to get the same, if we bid in different quantities? So we got a couple of questions, clarifications that we are sorting out. And I think we would like to see more participation in our pre-bid meetings. So we also feel encouraged. We are also, recently we floated one tender for hybrid. We got very competitive rates. That was for wind and solar. Now we are coming up with another tender for RTC that will also involve some sort of storage capacity that will be tied up by the developers. So through all these mechanisms, storage is already happening in a big way in our country. And we would like to address if there are any concerns. So we'll definitely take care of those. And if you can spread the word to all the companies, there are huge opportunities in this country, and Gujarat is going to take the lead. So they should come and explore those possibilities here.
Yeah, we have Rahul from IESA as well as other people in the audience. So I think that's definitely the right audience. No, I think just to follow up on that question though. So for example, you mentioned about RTC tender. So is there a reason why you are going for RTC? Is there a reason why you are, for example, not going for just peaking storage, solar plus storage or RE plus storage contracts?
So we are exploring all the possibilities. As I have said, we have gone ahead with wind, solar, hybrid, RDC, and standalone battery storage. And we are also coming up with tenders for pumped hydro. Last year we floated one tender which was technology agnostic, but we faced a lot of challenges, like because time duration, time for execution of the project, including total life of the project, all these things are not comparable for pumped hydro and battery storage. So then in our pre-bid meetings, we got the suggestion that these should be treated separately. That's why we have to cancel that tender and come up with separate tenders for standalone battery and pumped storage. So we are working on those lines based on the feedback received from the developers. So it's because these things are evolving. So we are also learning in the process, and accordingly we are fine-tuning our proposals. But you are aware that for each and everything, we have to go to regulator to take the deviation in our tender. So that is taking some time. But now I think regulations also are now up to date, and now we'll see fast growth in the sector. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So now my next question is to Vice Chair Gunda. I think just picking up on what you mentioned in your last point is what role has energy storage played in the state power system? And you talked about reliability, you talked about capacity to certain extent, ancillary, and so on and so forth. So what is it mainly used for, and how is it going to change in the future, particularly with the rising demand, with net zero commitment, and do you anticipate any other changes?
Yeah, thanks, Nikit. And I think the answer is all of them, right? So it's kind of right now being a part of reliability, ancillary services, broadly helps with the price arbitrage. And it is an RA resource right now, resource adequacy capacity resource. So I think it's important to note kind of a couple of high-level data points. One is, as we build grid scale, we anticipate adding about 50 gigs to 60 gigs on the grid scale. But at the same time, we are going to have at least half of that on the behind the meter in terms of behind the meter storage. So that's one. The second data point is the more and more electric vehicles we have, for example, by 2030, as you have 6 million vehicles in California, that's 60 gigs on the wheels in 2030. So we are talking about 3 different battery, assets that we want to manage to provide the best customer benefit. So in terms of the bulk side, we anticipate that to continue to add value in both reliability, ancillary, and capacity markets. In terms of behind the meter, I think it'll be primarily focused on load shaping. And kind of thinking through, for example, behind the meter, high level survey results point to generally customers are okay with arbitraging about 20% of the capacity. But under extreme situations, they're happy to do it for about 50%. So you have 20% playing a role in the load modifying space, and about another 30% in the emergency services. Meaning, given the extreme weather in California and the climate change that we anticipate to see, there will be essentially 50 hours a year that we might be so outside the bounds of our planning standards that we have to rely on demand resources to support that. So that's the third element I think we need to continue to think about. And finally, with that emergency services, you have an opportunity with electric vehicles, virtual power plants, feeding back to the grid. I do want to share a couple of pieces in terms of, the kind of success, but also, ongoing challenges in adding storage. We recognize there is a huge need for storage, but we need to quickly move away from 2 to 4 hours to maybe 8 to 10 hour storage. That's longer term, especially to support the winter peak and long durations of cloud cover and other issues. So in order to do that, we really have to research additional battery chemistries and start looking at battery chemistries that allow for longer vantage point. Second, supply chain, thinking through supply chain limitations. We just saw that in COVID. Once the supply chains got hit, we couldn't build anything in California. That was an issue. And finally, just kind of thinking through the land use implications and, essentially people being okay building large projects in concentrated areas. We had a couple of safety issues with bulk storage projects that are not really because of the chemistry, but the design of the facility. But those are really impacting the customer, the community perspectives on the safety of storage. And they are beginning to have some discussions on not allowing storage projects in areas that have high density. So which is exactly where you need them. And so what do you do with the land use permitting issues?
Right. No, that's quite a comprehensive answer. Thank you so much. So just picking on the supply chain issue, I would like to get to Rahul, just to understand, are kind of storage supply chains or domestic manufacturing posing any challenges or barriers to developers in bringing that in? For example, as Gupta ji also mentioned, a pumped hydro might be location specific, might be hampered by construction delays and so on and so forth. On the other hand, battery storage might be quick to deploy, but may face some supply chain challenges, as the Vice Chair Gunda was mentioning. So what is your perspective, and how do you see this evolving in the future?
Sure. So I think again, supply chain challenges will be there for both batteries as well as for pumped hydro, right? Because again, we have now suddenly a great enthusiasm about pumped hydro, but like in last 50 years in India, we have built only 5 gigawatt of pumped hydro, and now suddenly there are almost 20 plus gigawatt of pumped hydro in pipeline. And at least when we were talking to some of the manufacturers, I don't think there is sufficient capacity for even pumped hydro facilities and all the components which will be available. And that too, other thing right now, I think everyone is struggling a little bit is what is realistic timeline for pumped hydro, because traditionally pumped hydro projects have taken around the globe at least 10 years, 15 years, whereas now In India, the expectation is with faster environmental clearance, you are going to get some of these pumped hydro facilities built within 3 years or maybe 5 years. So that will put a lot of pressure on the supply chains for pumped hydro as well. In terms of the batteries, again, I think you're familiar with the numbers and you showed some of the charts in terms of the global battery manufacturing capacity. That is growing much, much faster. The challenge is, will there be sufficient capacity for stationary storage batteries in India? And the way I feel it is a question of demand and supply, right? Because right now, we ourselves as the CES have worked with more than 10 large conglomerates in India who are very much interested in investing in batteries for stationary storage. They are just saying that right now they are not seeing the consistent demand which would support like 10 plus gigawatt hour of manufacturing, because that's becoming the minimum scale for manufacturing. And some of the companies who have already announced battery manufacturing have plans for both mobility as well as stationary storage manufacturing. Many of the companies with whom we have worked, we have actually recommended to them to make sure that they have some flexibility in their production line, so that on the same production line, they could manufacture either batteries which are more suitable for EVs or more suitable for stationary. So I think as soon as the demand side certainty comes in, and it is not about getting 1 or 2 tenders done, but the way we had did it with solar, where there was sort of almost a 10-year roadmap in terms of year by year, how many tenders were coming in, were laid out. And SECI did an amazing job in terms of giving that assurance to the industry that these tenders are going to happen year after year or quarter after quarter, and there was a stability in that. So I think that is right now the biggest missing thing. And the other side I feel is that from the various work as the IESA we have done, we think actually behind the meter also, or the commercial industrial customer, there is a tremendous potential for stationary storage, because that's where you can get additional value for transmission, distribution, optimization. But that's the area where actually financing has been a bottleneck. And there has been discussion with World Bank as well as some of the other financing agencies for addressing that. And we are making some headway, but it is taking much longer than what we would have liked, because we are seeing there are many commercial industrial customers where there is a 5 to 7 year payback available, but those projects are not getting easy financing. So even addressing that will actually open up a significant demand for stationary storage, and that will encourage investments in the manufacturing and addressing the supply chain issue. But it's a chicken and egg, because you don't want to start putting in import duties and other things before there's a domestic manufacturing. Otherwise, on the customer side, customers will say, oh, prices are not competitive and demand will not grow. So that's a fine balance. But the good part is, I think with SECI as well as various other government agencies and MNRE, I think people have studied this quite a lot. So I hope we will be able to fine tune that balance. But my main urge is that we should not be just focusing on the capital cost as the only parameter for this, because we ourselves as a CES have taken almost 10 years to now manage 4 gigawatt hour of batteries in US market. And the kind of learning what you get in terms of actually operating, optimizing the assets, both from design as well as operational life, that has a huge impact on the levelized cost. It is not only what levelized cost you see on a spreadsheet, but what you can actually achieve on ground requires a lot of optimization, and that will take time and learning by doing.
All right, excellent. Thanks a lot. I think Shivharaji has to leave. So I think if you could stay for a few more minutes, we'll be happy to, but totally understand if you have to leave.
You have to excuse me. I have to attend assembly session that is ongoing. So thank you for inviting me. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shivharaji.
Midway, but I can't help it. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think just in the interest of time, so one final kind of closing thoughts from all the panelists, and if you could just keep it to say 1.5 to 2 minutes, and so we'll have some time to get to some audience questions as well. So Mr. Gupta ji, so any kind of closing thoughts, especially on the future that you see especially on storage, as Rahul mentioned about the volumes guarantees into the future, And what kind of key changes that you envision or you would like to see in the future, short to medium term?
So let me see, the first assurance that we are going to have 500 gigawatt of minimum 500 gigawatt of renewable energy by 2030, that itself is a guarantee that there will be a guaranteed demand for storage, because this kind of renewable capacities cannot be sustained without adequate storage. So this is some sort of a, without giving any formal guarantee, an informal guarantee is already there. But to make sure that people do believe that there will be a storage requirement, we will be announcing a roadmap for minimum storage auctions, which will take place per year. This is already under consideration and probably may come out. We'll have to wait for a certain time because we will be having the general elections, and some of the policy decisions may have to wait for that. But the thought is already there, and it's at a fairly advanced stage that the standalone systems would also be auctioned, apart from FDRE and RTC tenders, which we are going to continue with. The one interesting aspect which we got today was this storage plus solar, without getting into the night supply or anything of that sort. So that is something which we will be experimenting on our own. But as far as what are the changes? See, we believe that we will be discussing it with the developers and the technical persons, and then design the tenders. But we still feel that any kind of design, the developers and their technical team are in a much better position to do it than we doing it. We should focus more on the kind of outcomes which we want and have the bid for the outcomes rather than prescribing the design. Shivhari has mentioned that there are two different systems, PSP and battery system, and probably it's very difficult to bring out a technologically agnostic thing. But we have had some discussions with the developers, and we feel it will be quite possible if we shorten the duration, factor in the transmission cost, which PSPs are going to have additionally, and the other factors which make it different. So those can be part of the bid itself, rather than getting into the qualification kind of a thing. That's still under development. And another possibility which we see is that wherever these solar and wind systems power plants are already put in, we the auctions and allot to the state and allow them the flexibility to get it located at their already established solar and wind plants. That is a possibility which we are discussing with the DISCOMs, and probably that we will come out. Of course, we will be specifying some minimum storage capacity which will have to be put in. It just can't be in simple few megawatts. So those, as I said, we normally don't come out with any prescription of our own. These are decided and evolved as the things move on, and the developers technical and their suggestions and the requirement of the DISCOM. So we will continue that way. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Gupta. So Vice Chair Gunda, so what would be, like, in 1 minute, what would be your top 3 or 4 best practice recommendations for regulators in India as they're looking to scale renewables and storage in the system? And more importantly, what pitfalls should they avoid?
Yeah, and I think Gupta sir actually mentioned many of the points, especially in the planning side, but let me just kind of point out 2 or 3 key elements. I think consumer acceptance of storage and planning for safety is extremely important. A couple of bad cases could throw off the entire market, and kind of thinking through that is really important. Two, given the scale of renewable resources we're talking about, having a more centralized land use planning and permitting regime would really help. So much of the solar and storage projects to date in California have been under local permitting. And more recently, the legislature passed a law to make the California Energy Commission have the opt-in permitting where some developer can come to the state rather than going to the local government to be at a more centralized level to help with the planning. I think three, people say there is no energy transition without transmission. Kind of thinking through the transmission planning and the interconnection queue on how we are going to approach innovative methods. One of the areas of focus for California for the interconnection is really moving towards a zonal approach, kind of thinking about renewable energy zones and how do we maximize the transmission availability. And that also ties in how do we ensure deliverability of the resources, especially to Gupta sir's point on if the solar and wind already have deliverability, could you use solar as could you use storage as an opportunity to maximize the deliverability option? And the last point is, what can we do to put storage everywhere possible? Could you add it at the substation? Could you put it behind the meter? Kind of rather than thinking about it as purely a bulk side resource, how far into the distribution sector can you come in to help push the storage that's extremely important as a resource?
That is a brilliant summary. I couldn't have summarized it better than you did, Vice Chair. So again, Rahul, last 1 minute, what would be your top priorities from a developer's perspective in terms of new business models or regulatory framework? India already has the national level energy storage obligations. So what is it that you would like to see?
Yeah, I think over the last 2-3 years, I think systematically most of the central regulators have removed many of the barriers. Only thing what we need is that some fine tuning or some of the fine prints with some of the regulations which are already announced. For example, in last year in budget, there was a viability gap funding was announced. Unfortunately, clear guidelines are not yet there. So in fact, many of the tenders which got delayed or cancelled were cancelled because state regulators or the tendering agencies wanted clarity on what they need to do to avail the viability gap funding. Similarly, there is a storage portfolio standards or storage portfolio obligation has been announced, but there is actually no clarity on exactly how much storage or how that's going to get calculated. So those type of a clarity, because there are, I think, high level direction is clear as Gupta sir and Shivareji have mentioned. I think multiple agencies have very concrete plan, and as our India Energy Storage Alliance, we are really excited with the kind of attention and capacity which many of these agencies have built. Now we just need to stay focused, get these things executed, and show that yes, we are actually delivering on this. And with the track record what we have with solar, with wind, I don't think there is any reason why we should lag behind on the storage. It's just that somewhere I feel that the last thing is that amongst the regulators, we need to make sure that we stop mixing up just vanilla solar or wind with hybrid projects, because the dispatchable renewables is almost a different quality product. So we cannot keep on comparing, saying that, oh, solar is going 1 rupee and standalone storage is costing 8 rupee and 10 rupees. So we want to wait for the cost to come down to 3 or 4 rupee, because unless we build projects, unless we start optimizing projects, manage it in field and develop the capacity, we are not going to get there. We have seen it with solar. We just need to go back and follow the same playbook for storage and keep on doing these activities. And the last thing I would mention that some of the challenges is actually some incentives which have been done for say renewables, right? For example, the transmission waiver. In fact, that is acting as a barrier, because right now there are so many centrally connected renewable projects being built without any attention to transmission optimization. And we are seeing states with a peak load of 15 gigawatt, and there is a 50 gigawatt renewables being built, and people are asking us to optimize like a 1 gigawatt storage on top of it. Whereas actually for optimizing transmission, you need to do a lot more storage. So those are things I think hopefully after 25, 26, I think some of those waivers will go away, and then people will start looking at optimization across generation, transmission, and distribution, as Mr. Gunda said. But we are getting there. We just need to stay focused.
All right, excellent. Thank you so much. I think this was a very useful and helpful session for us. We have already gone 4 minutes over, so we'll just take one question from the audience, and that is for Vice Chair Gunda. Can you share what innovations in contracts were introduced to enable storage procurement?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And in answering that question, I want to think about kind of the 3 domains that I talked about in terms of the usage of storage broadly on the load modifying side, the bulk grid capacity market / ancillary services, and the energy market and the emergency market. So three distinct product classes that we're thinking about. So on the load modifying side, I think the innovation there is really thinking about how do you take behind the meter storage flexibility as a potential RA value, right? So so thinking through what kind of so two elements. One, what kind of rates help us with the charging discharging pattern, and two, how do you essentially value that accurately, right? So just kind of rate design part. Second, to the extent that there is a reduction that's conceivable because of the behind the meter storage, how can that then translate into the resource adequacy reduction? So that's one. Second part on RA itself, the biggest innovation for California right now, and by the way, when I say resource adequacy, just making sure that the audience know, in California we have capacity markets versus a state like Texas, which is primarily energy markets. So in capacity market, the state essentially requires the load serving entities to pay for capacity and reserve that capacity to be bid in the market. So in California, what we are doing in order to make sure we value both the intermittent resources but also storage accurately is move towards an hourly resource adequacy. That's where we are moving towards, and that allows for product classes that are not multiple hours, but more on an hourly basis. So that's really kind of allowing us innovation. Finally, on the emergency services, it's the similar thing. How can I pay for half an hour, 1 hour, 2 hours of different products to allow for those 50 hours of the year? So those are the various things we are doing, and would love to follow up, with the person who has that question to further discuss.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So I think in the interest of time, we may have to close this session. So I would once again thank you all the panelists for your time. We've already gone over. So thank you so much for the time as well as the insights. And thank you everybody who attended the panel discussion for your time as well. We hope to engage further. Do reach out to us and do follow India Energy and Climate Center on our website, on our newsletter, as well as on LinkedIn. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Niket.
you,
Thanks, Shruti.
everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
So much for
Namaste.
joining.